going to summer school. Summer school. Ooh, where the kids are cool.
Well, so far, the most successful movie this year has been Up. Every time Pixar is going to put out a movie, there are some people who say this is going to be the one that's not going to be that good, and they've been wrong consistently.
Well, Cars.
I liked Cars.
Okay, well, you...
But I know Cars has detractors, Bugs Life has its detractors, but I'd still say there is no other studio that has
Bugs
had
Life has detractors?
Oh, yeah.
I love Bugs Life.
Me too. The bugs look a little plastic, but that was
Yeah, I
that was the
preferred
time.
Ants, but they came out like almost at the same time, and I thought Ants was it. I really liked Ants, but that's the. I mean, I think that's the limit of it because when we went to see Monsters vs. Aliens, I remember going with a friend who's a big animation fan, and I think it's just accepted that Pixar is so a cut above everybody else that you don't go into a film like Monsters vs. Aliens and go, you know, did DreamWorks approach, like, could it have been better if it was Pixar? It's just not even the same animal. It's so much better.
Well, they've had as successful a run as any sort of studio. And what do you think is the key to Pixar's success? Other than awesome movies.
I think that absolutely the key to Pixar's success is that everybody there making decisions knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing. You have people like John Lasseter was an animator that started way back in Disney in the late 70s, and everybody that works at that company knows about, they're the experts in their field at everything they do. And another thing is they workshop those movies. You know, they know what jokes work, they develop the stories for years sometimes.
Yeah, those films are made over a period of about 4 or 5 years. I think.
Right, and you don't have people that come in that have their Wall Street or their Ivy League business educations telling creative people what they should and shouldn't be doing.
So how crucial do you think it is that Pixar is in Emeryville and not Burbank?
I think it gives them a distance from Hollywood and a distance from that kind of thinking and that kind of those kinds of influences, and they're.
And it really is, and there's people who have, I mean, the people that I know who work there have such longevity with the company too, that, I mean, I think that is really a testament. You know, people who work at Pixar are happy working there, they admire John Lasseter, they feel a sense of community around that company, and there's a huge commitment to the product that they create. It's very much like that product is that company's baby. I remember when the whole Pixar-Disney split happened, a good friend of mine who works at Pixar was telling me how John Lasseter called all of the employees into a meeting and was like getting teary-eyed, basically explaining that all of this stuff that we've been developing essentially becomes work for hire, and Disney owns it, and we're going to have to abandon these stories that we've been developing and that are very precious to us, but just like recognizing that they were going to find their way. And I think like that, you just don't see that at major studios where, like, if a project dies at a major studio, you know, they're on to the next project. I don't think that there's that same commitment to this being very personal, this being
An
very
emotional investment.
and look how original what they do is. It never feels derivative, and that's, I mean, what we've been talking about with reboots and everything. Like, you know, Pixar is one of the few studios that is actually willing to tell a story that doesn't, I mean, like, I guess The Incredibles obviously has genre references in it, but it still feels very fresh and feels like a very
To some
new
extent, though, to be fair, I think some of the Pixar movies fell into a formula and they became derivative of themselves, of each other in a sense, but they were still outstanding movies. But that formula was starting to wear a little thin by around the time of Cars for me, and then
Cars, yeah, definitely.
The Incredibles came out and just knocked my socks off, and I just think Up is one of their best films.
Well, I think
just adore it.
what's interesting is, unlike the rest of Hollywood, is they're not chasing trends.
Yeah.
I mean, all Pixar I think is probably the most successful, certainly the most successful film company that's ever existed in the history of the world in terms of their success rate and their ability to create something new. They don't have to have a marketing department tell them what their
Clowns are big this year.
absolutely. And so everything that they do is based on originality and innovation and the love of what they're doing, and everybody has a...
And because a story is being developed over a course of years, it isn't about being current or being topical. It isn't about responding to what's fashionable right now. And in a way, those easy jokes that get made, you know, if Britney Spears is in the news and you watch a film and a reference is made to that, you recognize, like, well, okay, that's fun for now, what's going to happen when I watch this film when it comes out on cable or whatever. Like, how is it going to feel? How relevant will this story be if it
Like
relies
the
on
genie in Aladdin making
Oh, yeah.
Arsenio Hall
Well,
jokes or
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
Every
Exactly.
DreamWorks film except I think Kung Fu Panda really fell in that crutch, which is why Kung Fu Panda is my favorite DreamWorks.
I'm a minority for the whole Pixar thing. I don't like Pixar. I just
Ah,
don't
wow.
like it.
Categorically?
Because I know that what they make is good.
Okay.
And sometimes I might get teary-eyed, but it's just not my kind of movie. It's never my kind of movie because it even though adults can appreciate it, it's not an adult movie. And I'm always sitting there remembering, oh
Really?
yeah, it's
I
not
feel
an
like
adult
I totally
movie.
disagree.
I think
Yeah, I
It's
think-
the same-
I think
that's,
there's
that's
well-
why I feel about Star Wars, because it's not an adult movie because there's freaking Ewoks or something.
Well, that's funny because for me, the reason I think they're successful is those movies are really adult stories.
Yes.
The Incredibles is a midlife crisis.
The
Finding
Up
Nemo
Up
is about learning to let go of your kid.
overcoming the death of a loved one and moving on with your life. I mean, this
Yeah.
old man is literally dragging all of his baggage behind him in that house. I mean, it's a brilliant metaphor.
But as someone who has no kids and doesn't care about anything to do with kids, I just don't care. I see it as being too childish.
But
Even
Wow.
if it does have
Okay.
that adult
But-
story.
What about WALL-E? I thought WALL-E was one of the better science fiction movies
Same
that's
thing.
been made in the last decade.
See,
I
for
saw
me,
it and it was okay, but
oh man, because for
Yeah.
me, I think they're very adult. I mean, if there's
And
one
not-
theme that runs through Pixar, it's sort of
I
that
thought it was
love
very
means
slow.
sacrifice.
I thought
And
WALL-E
not-
The
was very
stuff you
slow.
have to give up for the people
But
you
I
love.
love that they had the courage to make it that slow. I love that they didn't try and make it, Animaniacs.
Well, see,
that it's-
slow for me in animation means it's just made for younger kids.
No, look, maybe I grew up watching the cartoons that were on, network television, and when my family moved overseas a lot, and we just got to see whatever was on, and I actually watched Wait Till Your Father Gets Home and thought I was entertained by it. But so when I was watching the Looney Tunes, I watched them and enjoyed them, and there's a lot of raucous stuff going on, and it's very much enjoyable for a child, but it isn't until you're an adult that you actually recognize what those cartoons mean. And it's totally enjoyable to children, but it also has a lot of material that is completely mature and completely, political and moral. And when you watch Pixar films, I think, especially in a case of like The Incredibles, it's so cinematically made. The visuals feel so much like what you would expect from a really good movie that you're not looking at it as like my mom doesn't like cartoons. So for her, if she's watching a film and it just looks like a cartoon, she's kind of going to tune out. So when you look at how amazing the graphics look in WALL-E, and like you don't even really feel like it is a cartoon, like you start to be able to appreciate that story outside of the platform of whether it's live action or animation, and I think that's really transcendent.
The only really like cartoon or animation, whatever 3D, anything that I actually like right now is Batman: The Brave and the Bold, because it is very adult and very comedic, and it makes fun of the Batman series while it is the Batman series.
Well, I'm curious what constitutes adult to you, though. Is it just that it
Not
can't...
childish.
Oh, well, I understand what the word means, but I mean, like, what actually constitutes adult in animation, like in Batman?
It
Brave and
doesn't
Bold?
try to be too cutesy. I hate things that are trying to be cutesy, and then that's when you know it's made for your 5-year-old.
Right.
I can see that.
Wow. Okay.
Although I mean,
But
with
I
the
do.
exception
But
of Cars,
I
think
gotta
Pixar-
say, they
Yeah.
are very good movies. I do agree. They're very good.
And I find them
movies.
completely
They're just-
adult. I mean,
And
WALL-E,
honestly, I'm a terribly cynical person most of the time, but I always
Clearly.
say, well, I feel like when I go to a Pixar film, I'm often railing against this desire to not have my life affirmed for me, where I'm just like, I don't want to go in there and go, oh, it feels so good. But I remember watching just that short Bounding that came out, I think it was before The Incredibles, right?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, I don't want to like this, but I can't help but like it. It's so good. And not just because it's cute, although there's cuteness to it, but just that it was so, like, I think that the way that they make things visually, it's so imaginative, and it's so, like, connecting the dots between how how we get from this picture to this picture. You can go many different ways.
Now, Happy
And
Tree Friends. Now, there's something.
that I think we can all agree is adult.
Yeah, definitely very adult.
What about the Venture Brothers?
although I did
Venture
tell-
Brothers?
Venture Brothers
Oh, yeah.
is my favorite show on television. I really love
Venture
Venture
Brothers.
Brothers.
I actually told Adam Baldwin about Happy Tree Friends, and he was IMing with his kids, and he sent it to his kids, and one of his kids was crying apparently.
Well, if Pixar, if the entertainment business, the movie business is a very volatile, unstable business. And I often thought if the studios were run, if Universal, Paramount, Warner Brothers were run the way Pixar was run, I mean, I don't even know if that's possible, but I think that you could see a paradigm shift, because the movie studios are spending tons of money on these huge rolls of the dice, and half the time they come up snake eyes and they don't.
Yeah.
I think to some extent
Imagine-
the studios were run like Pixar in the studio era, where
Right.
you had in the way that Pixar has a stable of directors and some writers and whatnot that alternate films. Like each director will have a film coming out every 3 or 4 years, and they kind of cycle through, and they have a corporate culture where the people love film. I mean, I think at Pixar the people can actually do the work as well, but I think the studio heads in the studio era had a love of film as well as business. They weren't pure sort of beat
Sure.
counters.
And they could take those projects that might be in origination for 4, 5, 10 years, and then eventually bring them to the screen in a really epic way, as opposed to just kind of churning them out as part of
And
a
there weren't
list.
expectations that every film had to be a blockbuster.
Right.
Yeah.
They didn't cost as much to make, and they weren't expected to make these mind-blowing
And I
sums
actually
of money.
I do wish, I think that honestly, obviously money is, the commerce of the film industry is going to guide this no matter what we want. But that's one of the things that I think I, as a film goer, really kind of rail against, which is that I love, a big summer blockbuster film, and I love a big, action film or whatever. Genre films are great. But when you get to the point where you think of these big studios and you think of their slate and you can only think of comic book characters, or those are the only movies that you can even associate with
Sequels,
these studios.
remakes,
Reboots.
Right, that it doesn't have, that means that whole visionary quality, the desire to use film as a medium for communication, for art, all of that is, and I, just the downturn of the commerce around independent film and art house cinema. I mean, it's not that that's what's better, it's that you kind of need all of the food groups, you
The
kind of need to be able
studios-
to
The
have all of
studios
them.
have been belaboring under the illusion that they can just make the
Well,
hits
they're-
and
they're-
not make anything else for
They're
a long
a
time.
snake that's eating its own tail.
Yeah.
They're
Gross.
remaking they're exactly. They're mining all of this existing material at the expense of creating the new franchises that will keep them
Right.
vital and fresh going into the future. They're going to run out of sequels and remakes,
Right.
Right.
and what's going to replace them?
No, and it's unfortunate. I mean, and that's why Pixar, I think if you were a studio and you were making movies between $20 and $60 million in this day and age, and you were spending maybe another 10 to 20 to market them, and that was it. You knew you couldn't make, if you told filmmakers, you cannot spend more money than $50 or $60 million, but you can make what you want. We trust you enough. And sure, there's going to be films that are going to misfire, but then you're going to get people like the Coen brothers, who've become so amazingly successful because their movies are wildly divergent, but they're not expensive.
And you'll also see people innovating in process, making it so that video can replace film in a meaningful way. Although we just saw Public Enemies last night, and I was very disappointed in how present video technology was in that. And and these are films that do cost, millions and millions of dollars.
Well, I wonder if the paradox of Pixar, they've been successful because they aren't afraid of failure. I mean, Up was a kid's movie
But
about an old guy,
I think Pixar's successful is because
and
they
they made it
know
because they love it.
Yeah, but they know they're not going to fail. I think that the thing about Pixar is they work their material to the point of, I've always believed that there are rules to storytelling. A good story works, and we all inherently understand that it works. That's why classic literature has remained classic through the years. It's an intangible thing, but we know it when we see it. And the people at Pixar spend years developing their stories until all facets are correct.
And Disney actually originated that discipline because they were taking classic stories from literature and classic stories from, historical events and making those into something that was palatable for children. But